Let's go back a bit further. We all have seen it with the story of the helicopters. One basic design gets proposed, realizing their potential as more than a troop carrier or medevac, and an entire class will be created dedicated to that role. This time it was with the armored personnel carriers. The armored personnel carriers have been there since World War I. They usually carry troops towards the battlefield, and depending on the situation or the order of the chain of command, your vehicle will be dismounted. The most famous of them all are the BTR series and the M113, also known as the battle bus. No, not that one. But what if it could fight alongside troops, having the ammunition to deal with both infantry and armored targets, while supporting the infantry at the same time? And that is where the infantry fighting vehicle was born. The role of an infantry fighting vehicle, or IFV, is to give an infantry unit battlefield, tactical, and operational mobility during combined arms operations, while providing fire support at the same time. One of the first series of IFVs were the BMP-1 and the Schützenpanzer, or the SPZ 12.3. But the BMP-1 was something new, and the United States made the M3 Bradley as a response to the BMP-1. Although it's not as simple as you might have expected. Introducing the Pentagon Wars. The Pentagon Wars is a comedy movie based on the book The Pentagon Wars: Reformers Challenge the Old Guard. It's not possible to talk about the Bradley without mentioning this movie. This film is an entire can of worms in itself, which cannot be discussed in a single video. Also, the movie itself comes from the same people who are called reformers or fighter plane mafia, and their beliefs are very much interesting. Like they say, an aircraft does not need a radar, missiles, and all these bells and whistles. Nah, don't worry guys, they probably did not play top tier air sim. Give them a MiG-27K and shove them in 12.7 and they probably survive for, 2 seconds before realizing you can't BVR someone with binoculars? So yeah, in general, please take this movie with a grain of salt. There are other content creators and historians such as Funny Skeletor dressed up as a laser-firing pig and Spookston, I'm sorry, I refuse to call my colleague a fur, who have talked about this film and Bradley's history. In the search for a mechanized infantry combat vehicle, or MICV, they changed so many things regarding its doctrine, design, and specifications it took them 20 years to finally make a vehicle that was right. After fiddling with the M113 and the project itself not going anywhere, and with the Vietnam War delaying the project and whatever the MBT-70 cancellation was, 3 proposals came in, one chosen by the name of XM723 by FCM Corporated. Wait, sorry, wrong country. After several evaluations and delays with regards to the turret, armaments, etc., in 1979 the final design was presented to the Army and the production was approved shortly afterwards in the 1980s. The Bradley, named after World War II Army General Omar Bradley, was split into 2 versions, both closely resembling each other but featuring minor differences and intended for different roles. And this is where our first Bradley comes in. The M3 Bradley, also known as the 8.3 Bradley, also known as the Better Bradley. F***ing fight me for it. Following the Gulf War in the early 1990s, US engineers developed a new modification for the widely used M3 Bradley in order to incorporate improvements derived from the operational experience gained during the conflict. And then we have the second variant of the vehicle called the M3A3 Bradley. The Bradley received numerous upgrades to its electronic systems, including a new fire control system, a laser rangefinder, and a thermal imaging for the commander, along with other improvements to the vehicle's protection and firepower. There are differences between both of the models, which we will talk about fairly soon. For now, let's get on with the armors and modules.
Time is running out, Mr. Dickinson. You need their help. It is time for them to wake up. Do not allow them to replace you or take you away. Be aware of the consequences.
Welcome to the Armor and Modular Protection Analysis, where we basically analyze the armors and modules inside of a vehicle. Today's vehicle is the M3 and M3A3 Bradley series of infantry fighting vehicles. Now the first thing we need to take a look at is the crew. The both Bradleys got a driver, gunner, and a commander. The M3 Bradley has one gunner optics with 4 to 12 times zoom with 18 degrees by -6 degrees FOV, while the M3A3 Bradley has a gunner and commander optics with the same 4 to 12 and 2 to 8 times zoom respectively. In the M3 Bradley, the gunner has Gen 1 thermals, night vision for both driver and commander itself, while the M3A3 has a commander sight which allows the commander to aim as well. It has Gen 2 thermals on both gunner, commander, and believe it or not, driver as well. The M3A3 Bradley has an additional IRST, for the purpose of role-playing as a short-range SPAA. Dealing with helicopters or planes that are close and slow will be much easier. Both have 3 standard engine smoke systems, or ESS, with 8 smoke grenades installed on the turret. It allows you to fire 4 of them, which will give you 2 attempts, covering your entire front from the enemy, which lasts 25 seconds. This vehicle has one central fuel tank situated at the bottom center of the tank with these fuel presets. The engine compartment consists of a protective shield, which we will talk about later. An engine block with 507 horsepower at 2,600 RPM, and on the A3 variant you got 600 horsepower. At the front of the engine you have an 8-gear transmission, 6 forward and 2 reverse gear, that allows the vehicle to go over 66 kilometers forwards, while on the A3 variant it's 5 kilometers slower and 15.4 kilometers backwards. And finally you have the radiator, which is on top and right side of the engine, with all of the 19 viewports scattered around the vehicle. I'm gonna talk about the Bradley's armor a little bit further into this video, but what you need to understand is that the engine compartment can sometimes block some kinetic rounds or even some low-tier APHEs. But if there is anything like APCR, APDS, or even APFSDS penetrating your vehicle from the front, you will start to see some very massive issue with a Bradley, which I will talk about fairly soon. Now let's analyze the armor. The Bradleys are designed to fight against infantry and maybe some armored targets using its ATGM. But this vehicle is not meant to take critical shots from enemy tanks. And since War Thunder does not have any kind of infantry, usually you will get shafted more than usual. So a more passive playstyle is highly recommended. The M3 and M3A3 are fairly different when it comes to the armor, but not that much to create a major difference on the battlefield. For starters, let's have a look at the frontal armor of the 8.3 variant. Generally, the Bradley is made out of aluminum alloy 5083 and 7039 with 25.4mm aluminum 5083 plates protecting the front of the vehicle, and the side armors being protected by also the 25.4mm of the 7039 variant, with the rear being much more weaker, with a common rolled homogeneous armor with 6.35mm of thickness. This is not the only time you're going to see the common rolled homogeneous armor on the Bradley, as the engine grills on the roof of the tank, and the side turrets on the 8.3 Bradley are also weaker by almost 1.3 and 1mm respectively. The external and internal armor on the Bradley can also differ depending on the model. For example, you can have a 6.35mm of rolled homogeneous armor at the front, the sides, and the turret basket at the rear section of the vehicle. There are also spare tracks on the front and left side of the Bradley. The internal armor on the Bradley is not that impressive, with a tiny spall liner barely even trying to protect the driver, and the 6mm of rolled homogeneous armor between the driver and the engine compartment. Now let's have a look at the M3A3 Bradley. The M3A3 Bradley is the improved version of the previous variant. Most of the weak spots have been disappeared, and generally the protection of the Bradley is not really that bad anymore, if you don't count the entire thing as a weak spot. As always, we have the standard 25.4mm of aluminum 5083 and 7039 with extra rolled homogeneous armor scattered all across the vehicle. The internal armor is pretty much similar, with the exception of the spall liner plates being added to the rear left and right side of the Bradley. This might sound a lot, but it's not really that much. Now I would like to rate the armor on the Bradley a 4 out of 10 because they gave it enough armor to protect itself from machine guns. Sometimes. This much armor gave it one single problem. It cannot float on water, unlike certain competitor vehicles. I mean, who cares about floating on water? Look at the goddamn BMP-2M. If I wanted to float on water, I would just, play War Thunder Naval. Look at this, Surface this. And I will talk about the playstyles a little bit later. Now let's have a look at the armaments that these two vehicles carry. Let's start with the main cannon of the Bradley, the 25mm M242 Bushmaster. This cannon has 59 degrees of elevation and -9 degrees of depression. With a decent vertical and horizontal targeting speeds of 42 degrees per second, it makes the Bradley a very handy and quick tank to use. As long as you don't peek out, of course, since, you're in the same height as the Empire State Building. The gun has a 2-plane stabilizer and it is able to be controlled by not only the gunner but also the commander itself. And of course, this cannon has a slow rate of fire compared to the other competitors such as BMP-2M, Marder 1A3, or Type 89, and STRFs as well, I guess. You can also change the fire rate of the Bradley to low for whatever reason. And the belt you get on the Bushmaster are not really bad either. The M3 Bradleys generally get 3 types of ammo: the high explosive incendiary tracer shell, armor-piercing discarding sabot, and the M919 APFSDS. We already know what HEIT is. Even though it might not have a lot of penetration and explosive mass, this high explosive shell is decent enough to penetrate low armored vehicles and destroy them with ease. When I'm talking about low armored vehicles, I'm talking about these guys. Or if you didn't find anything, you might as well use them to destroy the helicopters or planes. Since, 8.3 to 8.7 is where you start to see some, helicopter. Up next is the APDS. The APDS is going to be your main rounds on the 8.3 Bradley and A3 Bradley until you get the APFSDS. The APDS has a decent penetration of 80 to 75mm of armor. Now this one is very good against low armor targets and some of the sides of the main battle tanks at 8.3 BR. The M919 APFSDS is a sabot round that penetrates pretty deep, with 100mm of penetration only available on the M3A3 Bradley. The APDS and APFSDS does penetrate quite decent amount of armor if you aim well, but sometimes you yourself do feel that it is not enough. Aim for the weak spots or keep a somewhat decent distance or flank them and you will probably be fine. Also, apparently if you fire non-stop, your dispersion will be worse, like you're playing some sort of World of Tanks or something, so yeah, be careful about that as well. But here's the thing regarding the Bradley's cannon. These two vehicles have a belt feeding system, meaning that you still have access to APDS even though your vehicle is stock. But it is not full belt. Instead, depending on your vehicle, your belt presets can differ. On the M3 Bradley, you have one APDS, one HEIT as a default belt. The next belt, which can be unlocked at rank 1, is the M792, which is 3 rows of HEIT and 1 APDS. Which is, commonly useful for shooting down helicopters or airplanes, but I won't be recommending that one. And finally, the M791 with 3 APDS rounds and 1 HEIT, which can be unlocked at rank 3 modifications. On the M3A3 Bradley, things are a little bit easier, with a similar default belt, but this time you have M791 at rank 1 modifications. And finally, you have the M919 APFSDS at rank 4 modifications. Oh boy, yeah. That's pretty easy. Now you might have noticed that there is an extra double-barrel tube on the side of the turret, and that will be the ATGM launchers of the M3 Bradley. This ATGM carrier can load 2 anti-tank guided tow missiles, which depending on the model, it can have a major difference. The ATGM launcher is foldable and it folds itself once you go higher than 15 kilometers of speed. And once you want to fire, it takes quite a bit of time to deploy. You need to be at 0 kilometers in order to deploy the ATGM, so unfold your missile carrier before having an attempt to fire. You see, usually the unfold animation starts at 0 kilometers, and once you're under 15 kilometers, it won't fold. If you go higher than 15 kilometers, it will start to have a fold animation. If during this animation your speed goes down again, the fold animation gets reversed. If the folding animation is complete, you gotta stop completely again. It is quite annoying, but if you get used to it, you will not have a lot of hard time. Once you fire, depending on the type of ATGM, the experience can be either quite decent or not that great. Now let's talk about the type of tow missiles that this thing can carry, with the first one being the 127mm tube-launched optically guided wire command link guided missile, or TOW, or TOW for short. This is the most basic tow missile and your only choice on the 8.3 Bradley. As a mouse-guided ATGM, it's not really that bad, it's good for its own tier. You have 3 kilometers of range, which is more than enough, a nice explosive mass, and somewhat of a serviceable penetration. Overall, the response and the control of the tow missile is a little bit slow, and you have to get used to its weird flight performance. Once you fire the missile dips down a lot, and the fact that it tries to align itself with the gunner optics, which has a lot of parallax, does not help it either. Also, this thing does not have an IRCCM. At its own BR, it does the job quite well, but if you get up tiered and face up against composite armors or ERA, yeah, you might have some problems. Now let's go to the A3 variant and see how this one can handle itself, with the TOW 2 missile being its stock ATGM. This is a major upgrade compared to its normal TOW. This thing gets an IRCCM, better speed, 750 extra range, which is still more than enough, 1 kilogram of extra explosive mass, much more responsive compared to the normal TOW, and almost double the penetration. This ATGM feels pretty decent to control and is a major upgrade with a penetration compared to the previous one. At this BR, most of the vehicles that you face are carrying either composite armor or ERA. Unfortunately, the TOW 2 is not tandem charged. If you want to have that, we highly recommend you to get the TOW 2A, which is unlockable at rank 1 modifications. The difference between the normal and the A variant is the slightly higher and heavier explosive mass and of course tandem charged warhead. This allows you to do more damage to the vehicles that carry composite armor or ERA. And finally, the TOW 2B top attack missile, unlocked at rank 4 modifications. Now this missile is meh. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you know how to use it, it will be good, but it's more like a gambling. You roll the dice, you either pay the price or eat the rice. Captain Price. This time, this missile gets a heavy downgrade and completely switches from direct fire to a top attack missile. First of all, the speed is slightly worse, with the explosive mass being slightly better but with worse TNT equivalent than the normal TOW. And then the penetration gets tampered down to 100 millimeters, making it a challenging and weird missile to work around with. And the mechanic itself is fairly interesting. You aim at an enemy vehicle, and when you fire the ATGM, you notice that the ATGM itself is like slightly above the reticle itself. This, helps it out a little bit. And if you aim at it, it goes on top of the tank and explodes there, penetrating the tank from above. And sure, the missile works pretty well against tanks like Leopards or even light tanks, but generally the vehicles that you face up against are resistant to your missile. Maybe because it doesn't have enough penetration, or the missile just explodes at a bad time, or the ERA on Soviet tanks block your shot, or maybe the crew is somewhere else. Looking at you, TS-38. This is a little bit disappointing, since on the Swedish tech tree you have a Bill missile that has 500 millimeters of penetration. Sure, it has worse stats than the TOW 2B, but that thing kills Soviet tanks better than the Bradley. I mean, who cares about Sweden anyways? There's like, 2 people who actually play Swedish vehicles. But yeah, this was all the ammunition types that the Bradley could carry. Now let's have a look at the ammunition placements on these 2 tanks. Let's start with the common ammunition placement on the both Bradleys. All of the Bradleys got the 10 ATGM ammunition stored on the back right side of the chassis, and all of the Bradleys stored the ammunition belts under the gun, exactly behind the engine compartment. That can cause a lot of issues, which we will talk about it later. The spare ammunition for the gun is located at the bottom back and left side of the Bradley. Unless you want to single-handedly destroy the entire army of Yugoslavia, you don't need 5 rows of ammunition. So I and my friend Geem would highly recommend you to pick 1 ammo belt and leave it at that. This allows you to bait the enemy using your rear left side. Since it's empty, it's not gonna do that much. And I would recommend you to see your preferences and see what ATGMs you like. For me personally, I would like to rather pick 6 TOW 2Bs and 6 TOW 2As. But yeah, I almost forgot, this thing also has the ability to use a scout drone. And my god, this thing deserves its own video. Now let's get on with the vehicles themselves. This M3 Bradley sits at 8.3 BR. It's a nice touch compared to what you had with the M551 Sheridan. With the Shalala missile. No bro, I have 250. The Bradley itself is nothing special, and generally it depends on you. The Bradley's playstyle is mostly passive. You can be aggressive with it, but I personally won't recommend it, unless some maps might actually force you into it, such as Sweden or Paris. God damn it, wrong game again. And overall it is quite decent, and you can hold it together if you know what you're doing. The APDS shells are functional and are somewhat decent at that BR. At this build, you mostly have vehicles that commonly use HEAT-FS or HAPHE shells. In that case, your engine block and your driver can get critically damaged almost all the time, but thankfully your other crew members will survive. I hope, because this vehicle does get overpressured quite frequently. You can face up against APFSDS as well, which in that case, if they hit you directly into the center, you will most likely get killed to the ammunition under your turret. You get a scout drone ability that can help your squad mates a lot, but I'm not sure if it's going to be that useful with your common teammates. With regards to the lineup, I would prefer to have these ground vehicles, UH-1C and A4E early Skyhawk. Man, I swear, I only have these 3 vehicles, yet I have so much fun with them, it's almost incredible. I mean, I use backups on the Bradley quite frequently, yes, because I have skill issue, but let me tell you, tow missiles at 8.7 and walleyes on the Skyhawk, it's just beautiful. The M3A3 Bradley is a problematic vehicle at 10.0 BR. Let's start by comparing them to other vehicles. In general, the armor protection on the Bradley hasn't changed that much, and the tanks that are around you got even more powerful. Almost every single top tier vehicle uses some sort of APFSDS shell, and usually top tier players are much more accurate and dangerous than lower BRs. So you must have a very passive playstyle in order to make it work. This is the reason why I would prefer to play the 8.3 Bradley and why I think it's better. Because at least the lower tiers, the 8.3 variant is much easier and less frustrating due to the tanks being easier to encounter and overall less agile compared to the top tier counterparts. Things like Leopard 1s, Mouses, T-55s, or even Gepards are much easier to counter due to them usually having not good reaction time or not good gun handling compared to 2S38s, Leopard 2A4s, and most importantly, the Object 292s. Top tiers starting at 10.0 pretty much become CSGO lobbies with ops, and you as a person who has a Negev, you can't really do much. And even competitor IFVs in other nations are much better and can destroy you fairly easily if you're not careful. Threats like 2S38s, BMP2Fs, SDRF 9040 bills, and so on. Now let me be clear, this does not mean that you will perform terribly all the time. It always depends on you and you alone. Of course, you get better missiles, offensive armaments, more improved fire control systems, and all the bells and whistles compared to the previous Bradley, but honestly, I prefer to have the fun factor over the improvements. But hey, I'm just a helicopter player, so please don't expect me to have a lot of skill. But overall, I don't like the Bradley because of it having thermals or missiles or these kind of stuff. I like it because this tank is iconic to me. It is one of the major vehicles in the Operation Desert Storm. This is one of the reasons why you always see me carry out the desert camouflage on both of the Bradleys. I mean, yeah, sure, you see me use the Lebanese camo, but nah, I still love the normal one. I don't play the Bradleys because I have to. It's because I love them. This is the state of my tech tree, and this is where my Bradley sits at. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching my video. I genuinely appreciate it. So, okay, this is my first time I made a video on a ground vehicle, and I'm still experimenting with a lot of things. Give me your suggestions down in the comment section so, I would improve my reviews on the ground vehicles in the future. And this was the end of today's video. If you liked it, you can subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, join the membership, or give a super thanks if you want to. For now, this is me, Bob Dickinson, and thank you for watching.